Is Dr. Strang at odds with Premier Houston on COVID-19 masking policy? Dr. Strang recently suggested that he can't comment on the decisions made by the elected government, which, as we know, of course, is led by Tim Houston. Hi, I'm Joe Ward of Boxer Shorts Media, and it's time to talk about the balance, or maybe the push and pull, between public health and political decision-making in Nova Scotia in terms of how COVID-19 is being handled. Let's watch a clip from April 14, 2022, so that you can hear the comment Dr. Strang made for yourself.
Do you think it was a premature move to remove the mandates given the high number of weekly cases that we're continuing to see?
So public health has always recommended, and we continue to strongly recommend, that people wear masks in indoor public places and workplaces, whether there's a mandate or not. I can't comment on the decision that's been made by elected government on removing the mandate, but a very clear recommendation from myself and from public health that people continue to wear masks where previously they would have been required to wear masks.
So there you have it. Strang certainly makes it pretty clear that from a public health standpoint, he wants people to wear masks. Now, despite it being quite obvious that he's apparently in disagreement with the mandate being dropped, he's still showing a reluctance to comment critically on Houston's decision to discontinue the mask requirements for the general public, with some exceptions. I think he should just tell it like it is. In fact, I believe that's the responsibility of his role. But I also took a look back in time to see how our new premier kicked things off in collaborating with Strang as our newly minted premier. Very shortly after getting elected, Houston emphasized during a COVID-19 press briefing that he intended to continue to follow the advice of public health experts. Here's that clip from August 23rd, 2021.
With the Delta variant causing rising cases in other provinces, we must continue to be vigilant while we turn our attention towards a further reopening of our province. So as we do, we'll continue to follow the advice of public health experts.
Yes, we can get into semantics if you want. The word follow Houston used, it suggests yielding to public health preferences. Whereas if he had said continue to evaluate or take into consideration the advice from public health, that seems like it would have been a better fit with what we're seeing now. He'll listen to Strang's advice, but he's not bound by it. Here's something I think we should be asking. Is it okay for Strang to back down when it comes to public health? Instead of encouraging us to wear masks, couldn't he just state directly that he disagrees with the Premier's position and that he strongly encourages the government of Nova Scotia to follow his public advice, not just us? Not too long ago, it was feedback from Dr. Andrew Link that was successful in bringing masks back to the classroom for our children. Link was effective in influencing policy from his position of medical expertise. Some of you with a really good memory may recall that Strang and Premier McNeil actually joked about the relationship between political and public health or medical advice and not offering it to one another. Let's roll back to April 24th, 2020.
Aren't you glad I don't give you any medical advice?
I don't give you political advice, so we're even.
We're a good team.
It seems to me that anything that relates specifically to epidemiology would be within the scope of responsibility for Dr. Strang to call the shots, including mask usage, don't you think? If we were to think of political decision-making related to the pandemic, there's all kinds of examples we'd expect to be led by the politicians. Financial support for businesses or individuals, short-term rent controls, provisions for sick leave, and expedited legislation, if needed, to enact new public health measures. Those are just a few that come to mind. On the other hand, in terms of public health, Strang would decide when to use masks, choose vaccine suppliers, create testing and test kit distribution processes, prioritize the rollout of vaccines, set policy on the restrictions including business capacity and gathering limits and when to require them or when not to. From my perspective, if Dr. Strang is now suggesting that masking simply isn't his call, it seems like he's yielding public health decision-making to the political decision-makers who lack the expertise to do so. But that begets a bigger question for me. If Strang won't say directly that he disagrees with the Premier, and he's not openly asking him to reconsider, it may set a problematic precedent. What if there are other things from the perspective of public health upon which he's yielded to the political pressure? What if we just don't know what those disagreements are that Strang may have given into political pressure on? How do we know if all of the decisions made by Strang were actually what he considered to be the best course of action for public health and not just the preferred choice of any of the 3 premiers of Nova Scotia that he's worked with throughout the pandemic? Keep in mind, Strang is not an MLA. He's not under any obligation to stay on message the way partisan figures must? Can Dr. Strang continue to be perceived as effective in his role by all of us if there's a reasoned suggestion that he'll readily yield to political decision-making? How long would he remain in his role if he had been less agreeable and more blunt in his policy disagreement with the Premier on masking? Listen, I've never been as bullish on Strang's performance as many of you, nor the stay the blazes home stuff from stern Uncle Stephen. And it's really not my intention to start pointing out why today. But at this point, I don't know what else Strang would do differently than the Houston government, besides maybe masking, or how often he's yielded to the Premier, current or former, in the decisions that have been made behind the scenes throughout the pandemic. Who's really calling the shots? Can we be confident that they're making the right decisions? Yes, high vaccination rates are the key difference in risk levels now, even if you're among the folks who don't believe it. But there was a time when we were also at risk of being fined for taking a non-essential car ride to get out of the house, with almost no cases in our zone. And now we're at peak daily infection rates, just what infections we're actually counting, and yet counterintuitively, many precautions have been abandoned. I know many of you are less concerned now and you were tired of the restrictions, but what's more important than the decision of requiring masks or not requiring masks is who is making the decision and the other decisions that affect us. After all, people are still dying of COVID-19, but we just don't hear about it as much as we used to. Is giving us less information really a public health best practice? And how would we ever know who decided that we should be given this information less frequently, or what was their motivation for doing so? I could suggest it's time for Strang to move on, but the expected outcome would be obvious too. The role might be quickly taken on by someone even less likely to push back against the political pressure exerted upon their decision-making by Houston's government. To make sure you don't miss out on future episodes of Boxer Shorts Media, please click subscribe.
Please hang up and try again.